Okay, so for the quiz, this will be the quiz on 6.3 on 6.4. There's two parts to the quiz. There's the adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, as well as the composites related to different functions. And then that's 6.3 and 6.4 are inverses. So in 6.3, I'm basically going to give you three questions. Those questions could include doing an f of x plus a g of x, an f of x minus a g of x, an f of x times a g of x, and an f of x divided by a g of x, or a g of x over f of x. Okay? I can ask you to do any one of these. Okay, this is related to 6.3. So I'll give you an f of x. Let's say I give you f of x is 2 times x plus 3. And I give you a g of x equal to x to the 1/2 as an example. And I might ask you to add these, subtract these, multiply these, or divide. And you need to make sure that your rules of exponents, particularly around multiplication and division, that you have that understood. You know, something like this can be simplified by subtracting exponents. 3/2 minus a half is 1, so that's x. Or, if you're multiplying, make sure you know that you can multiply by adding exponents. 3/2 plus 1/2 is 2. For adding and subtracting, make sure you remember that the exponents have to be the same. In this case, 3x to the 1/2 plus 2x to the 1/2 is 5x to the 1/2. But 3x to the 1/2 plus 2x to the 1/3, well, this is a half and this is a third. You cannot add. So these cannot be combined, and that would be your answer. You're also going to need to tell me the domain. So any of these problems I give you, you got to do the domain. And remember, to do the domain for plus, minus, multiplication, and division, my recommendation is to make a number line and write the domain of f of x and kind of graph it, and do the same for g of x, and do the same for the answer. Okay, and you're going to find the overlapping domains, and the final domain will be the overlapping domain. If you forget how to do that, go back to the previous homework. Also in 6.3 are composites, f of g of x or g of f of x. Okay, I'm going to give you one of these to do, and I'm going to ask you for the domain. And remember, when you do the domain for the composites, you want to take the domain of the inner. So if it was f of g of x, this is the inner, g of x in this case, and the domain of your answer. And you want to look for the intersection of those two domains. Remember, you cannot have negative even roots. This, okay, there's a restriction, x to the 1/6. That's the 6th root of x. You cannot have x be negative. It's okay to have an odd root, but you cannot have even. So even roots, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, you're going to have a restriction on x that it has to be 0 or greater. You also cannot have 0 in the denominator. So anytime you see 0 in the denominator, x cannot be 0. Okay, so that relates to 6.3. And make sure you go back to your old homeworks to look at that. Now, in terms of 6.4, that's inverses. I'm going to give you 2 questions on inverses on the quiz. The first, I'm going to ask you to verify whether 2 functions are inverses. So I'll give you an f of x, and I'll give you a g of x. And I'm going to ask you to verify it using this rule, where they're composites. Remember the rule. For 2 functions to be composite, f of g of x has to be x, and g of f of x has to be x. That's the way you're going to do it. And then the final thing I'm going to ask you to do, or 2 remaining things I'm going to ask you to do, there's 6 questions on the quiz, not 5, 6. I'm also going to ask you to tell me what an inverse is. So if I give you f of x equals x plus 3, and I ask you for the inverse, okay, you're going to swap the x's and y's, and then you're going to solve for y, and that's going to be your answer. So you'll have a verify, that's what this is. You'll have a find the inverse, that's what this is. And then I'm going to give you a horizontal line test question. I'm going to give you a function. You're going to need to graph it. You're going to graph it by plotting points. Okay, after you plot the points and you graph it, and I'll give you the grid, you're going to draw a horizontal line. If the horizontal line goes through that graph at more than one point, you're going to tell me there is no inverse. If that horizontal line can go through the graph and intersect at only one point and no more than one, then you're going to tell me that that function does have an inverse. So again, 6 questions on the quiz. First 3 relate to 6.3. The second 3 relate to 6.4. Study hard. Good luck.